Welcome back to the Changing Earth podcast with author Sarah F. Hathaway and co-host Chen Gibson. Blending survival, fiction, and fact to bring you entertaining education that will help you dream, survive, and thrive. And now, here's your host, Sarah F. Hathaway and Chen Gibson.
Chapter 36. The sergeant at the gate was a dark-skinned man whose name tag was labeled Walker. "Sir," Sergeant Walker greeted him. "Can you direct me to where the people from Peach Springs are being housed?" Cole wondered. "They're still over at the Welcome Warehouse, sir. They'll be given work assignments and housing from there," Walker informed him. "It's inside on the left, sir. You can't miss it." "Thank you, Sergeant," Cole replied, watching the colossal metal gate slide open. The people inside looked down and away from Cole as he walked down the street, and the tension grew thicker as he approached the Welcome Warehouse. Cole moved towards the massive concrete building. Soldiers on catwalks approached him as he progressed through the gate to the desk. He was directed to a large courtyard where he found Barry King chatting with a group of refugees. "Virgis, there you are. Are you getting us out of here?" Barry asked eagerly as Cole approached. "I can only take one," Cole admitted. Barry looked at him, dumbfounded. "Are you serious? One?" Cole nodded, looking him in the eyes. Barry looked down and away, lost in thought. He finally looked back at Cole. "You have to take Rydell or Ginger." Cole's voice was so cold it frightened him as he responded. "We've already decided. We're taking Ginger." Barry nodded. "Good. She needs a chance at life." "She might have more of that here." "You know what it is we do," Cole answered flatly. "I know." "Are you looking for the people that stole our food?" "I'm sending out 2 teams in the morning," Cole assured him. "When you find them, you make them pay for what they did." "Don't worry, they will." "Do you know where we can find Ginger?" Cole asked, looking around. "She's already been given housing in Tent City. It's number 240. "Thanks," Cole replied. He shook Barry's hand. Even though his heart was breaking, he remained stoic. He could do nothing more than that for the man now. 10 minutes inside the Welcome Warehouse had been more than enough. The soldiers circled like hawks and the place was barren and sterile. He stepped back into the camp. Soldiers were the most numerous occupants on the street, and they directed him to Ginger's tent. "You ready to get out of here?" Cole asked, pulling the flap to her tent back. She was folding clothes and jumped at the sound of Cole's voice. Her eyes grew wide with joy, and she ran to him, throwing her arms around him. "It's about damn time you showed up," Ginger declared, her red, wavy hair bouncing about her face. Cole grinned widely, holding her tightly. "You can't believe this place. Rydell and Barry will be so happy," Ginger said, letting him go. "I can only get you out," Cole declared officially. Ginger looked at him dumbfounded, asking, "What?" "I don't have jurisdiction over the refugees. I could only get one of you out," Cole explained. Thinking about his statement, Ginger was confused. "You chose me?" "I did," Cole replied. "But I'm not a fighter," Ginger responded. "You're going to be. You can start as a communications specialist," Cole told her. "But," Ginger began to say, Cole cut her off. "You're not staying here. Get your stuff." "I'm with Tim now, Cole. I love him," Ginger admitted. "This is not about me and you or you and Tim. This is about you, and you're not living here. So get your shit and let's go, Private." Ginger smiled widely, answering him, "Yes, sir." First Private Darrell Guthrie, a young soldier with deep brown eyes, met Major Virgis as he and Ginger exited the refugee camp. "Major Virgis, sir. It's an honor serving under you, sir," Guthrie declared eagerly. "Hold your flattery for a commander that cares. Show me how honored you are by performing," Cole snapped, turning to walk towards the soldiers' barracks. "Just tell me what you need, sir," Guthrie answered him. A group of about 15 refugees left Peach Springs headed for Mexico. Last we knew, they had 2 trucks with an unknown gasoline supply. I need you to find them. Guthrie looked at him curiously. "Yes, sir, I'll try. But do you have any way to identify them further?" "There's a woman in the refugee camp, Barbara Grissom. She'll be able to give you descriptions. Take your squad and Alpha Squad, Cole ordered. Do you have a place picked for your headquarters? Where will we find you? Guthrie wondered. Bring the refugees here and then meet us in Reno, Cole directed. Yes, sir, Guthrie declared, heading off to fulfill his mission. Reno? Monroe asked, smiling widely at Ginger as he approached with Chappie. We going for a visit with Dolores? Chappie asked. It makes sense to put our base there. It has the infrastructure. The feds are controlling the Arizona border in Vegas. We will need to focus our efforts in Reno, Monroe chuckled, thinking out loud. Thanks for your permission, but it's not needed, Cole interjected, amused by his analysis. We're going to need more soldiers, Chappie added. He's right. We've got a lot of ground to cover and not enough people to do it, Monroe agreed. One step at a time, boys. I'll get in touch with General McClintock. Maybe we can send refugees to Minnesota to get them trained. Or we can set up our own, Monroe suggested. I think this territory is going to keep us plenty busy. We'll be better off keeping our focus there. In the meantime, let's get a home base set up and go to task getting these areas stabilized. Well, I'm not complaining. I've been missing Dolores's place, Chappie teased. Is it a restaurant? Does she have good food there? Ginger wondered. Monroe shook his head, not sure how to respond. He smiled, answering, more or less. Come on, I'll teach you how to inventory gear for the road. You promised shooting practice, too. I'm not going out there in this uniform without more training with this rifle, Ginger insisted. Don't worry, we'll have you dialed in before you know it. Sure beats living in that camp. Curious about what happened, Cole asked. Was it that bad? Go take a tour and see for yourself, Major Virgis. They treat those people like cattle, and they're starving in there, Ginger replied. Cole thought about her words, disgusted with the situation. But he had only one way to help now. Then let's secure more provisions, Cole declared, walking towards the truck. Monroe stayed by his side, explaining, Alex was telling me about a distribution warehouse 30 miles north of here. A large group is securing it. We could relocate the refugees and secure provisions for ourselves in the camp. We're headed that direction anyhow. Get the squads together and the vehicles loaded. Hello and welcome back to the Changing Earth podcast. This is episode number 434, season 3. No, wrong show. Season 15, episode 36. I was switching over to audio drama. Hey, Chin, what's up?
Hey, chin's up, y'all.
And we have Phil Rabalais in the house. Hey, Phil, how's it going?
Hey, Sarah. Hey, Chin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we don't really have a set task on the Changing Earth podcast anymore. We've been going so long. We just come and hang out with everybody and get her done. So we're just going to roll with the punches. I do have some clearinghouse stuff first, though. End of April, the 26th to the 28th, I'll be up in Illinois at the Patriot Homesteading Conference. So if you guys are in the area, you got to check that out. Phil, who's with us, I was just on your podcast this morning, and that was a blast, by the way. And,
I'm glad you enjoyed yourself.
Yeah, that was good. And Gillian let me know that she is doing the Women Who Prep conference, which is an online conference. So if you guys want to hang out in your jammies and still learn a ton of prepping information, that's where it's at, Women Who Prep. When is that? It's April.
Oh, Jesus in heaven. I couldn't tell you to save my life. Gillian has all those
April
dates.
20th to something. I think it's the weekend before I'm there. Yeah.
That sounds pretty close.
I think so. I'm clicking along there. I think it's pretty right on. Anyway, look that up. Women Who Prep. That is for the ladies in the preparedness realm. That is ironically enough the same time as the LA Book Fair. I just know because my book's going to be out there, so that's kind of ironic. But then we got Prepper Camp coming up in September, of course, and that's just it's like my Christmas every year. Really is Prepper Camp. We'll just go there. So
yep, and this year I'll have Gillian and my daughter in tow. Last year they skipped out. This year last year me and Andrew Cohen was kind of a last minute decision, and she was butting up against being able to find substitute teachers and everything, so she declined to come. And then after she said she wasn't coming, she spent the next 6 weeks bemoaning that. So literally the day when tickets went on sale, I had everything all signed up and taken care of, and told them, you're coming, like it or not.
We got to get the Intrepid Commanders family to actually come with him one time. Make it a family affair. Right? I know. We got boys the same age. So Intrepid Commander, if you're out there, this is the psychological message. Bring the family.
The browbeating will continue until you comply.
Yes, that's right. That is right. We'll just have to keep... When he doesn't give me his lines for the audio drama, I just keep sending him emojis of line, street line, line. I seriously just hammer him every day till I get those lines because he's the worst with it. I got to just drive him nuts. So he's like, okay, I didn't even know so many emojis existed that you could communicate line through. I'm like, So, alrighty. We just heard Virgis. Last week, he got to choose one person from his group. Phil actually plays Virgis. So, way to go, Phil. Dave's always like, when I listen to Phil now, all I can hear is Virgis.
Well, but I still marvel at the fact that, you specifically picked me because I don't have an accent, so I can kind of slip into that role really nicely. But for all these years, I thought that my accent was just this mangled mismatch of half Cajun and half Southeast Texas. So I don't know. Maybe in the midst of all the deployments and everything, I lost it.
Yep. Yeah, you did. I'm telling you, I'm in East Texas, and I don't know. Say the Sabine River for me.
I can't say Sabine, it's Sabine.
There you go. See? No, lots of them around here. It's Sabine River. I'm like, whatever. Yeah.
That's a different part of Texas, apparently.
That's what I'm talking about. All right. So he's going into the FEMA camp, his first glimpse kind of behind the gates. And at the FEMA camp, everybody comes into the welcome warehouse first, which is just a giant observation containment center. And if you do well, you get released into general population. And if not, well, you get to hang out in the welcome warehouse for a little bit longer. And it's kind of a harsh reality for him when he sees this, because one hand, he's all pissed off because the refugees just robbed him. But on the other hand, it's oh, this sucks in here,
Kind of sees the desperation of their situation, I guess.
Right. Yeah, it hits home instead of being hidden behind a wall. And then, he's off to set up base, how to feed everyone, how to ensure that these free towns that exist are going to stay free towns, how to work with the federal government while also trying to, he's kind of under the radar for the militias on letting them know what's going on. So he's walking many, many ethical lines right now. I really liked bringing his character to life. It's been a lot of fun to do. So thank you for stepping up into that role. I knew you were going to be perfect for that role. I just thought that's Phil. One unique voice right there. Boom. So
I'll
Phil,
take it.
You've actually been involved in a lot of cleanup situations, both personally and through your employment. So I thought you were the man to come on and talk about, what happens after the storm. And I'd like to start on the personal level in a micro level and then kind of build out from there. So, everybody, my podcast listeners should know who you are, but if they don't, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then let's kind of jump into it.
So I guess the short version, because Lord knows I could talk the ears off a brass monkey, is, I am a 41-year-old husband and father. I've been kind of into prepping in some way or the other, basically since I was a kid. I mean, growing up on the Gulf Coast, we get chased around by hurricanes pretty much from birth. So you learn the lessons of, rice and beans and peanut butter and bottled water very, very early, because it's just a part of life down here to be ready to deal with an extended power outage and be prepared to deal with whatever Mother Nature is going to throw in your lap, because it's never a matter of if, it's when. It's how long till the next time y'all get hit.
Right.
When I was 17 years old, I enlisted in Louisiana National Guard. So I was on 9/11. I was at Fort Eustis, Virginia, up in Newport News, and literally like there in a break room in one of the hangars watched the second plane hit the tower. So it wasn't until about the end of 2003 I got the call that my unit was going to deploy to Iraq. We went in for OIF-2, and we were there from late January, early February of 2004, came home the very beginning of February 2005. And, Hurricane Katrina was right on the heels of that. So the end of that August, I was still in the Louisiana National Guard. We got hit by Hurricane Katrina down here in this area. And I spent from the end of August until December 31st on orders with the state assisting in the relief effort.
So you got deployed as a member of the National Guard over to Iraq?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Yep. Well, I mean, for the buildup and for the numbers and the manpower they needed, like I know that my unit went to Iraq. Another unit that a bunch of friends of mine were in that was an engineer battalion. They went to Afghanistan. So like they... during OIF and OEF fighting a war on two fronts, the DoD was not shy about tapping National Guard and even reserve assets left and right.
Got you.
So there's a lot of us, there's a whole lot of us that are like age 30 to 40 who had a very interesting time in our teens and 20s in combat zones.
Interesting. Well, yeah, you and both Chin, you guys are both more used to the hurricane type events. Where we really got socked, when I lived in Michigan, it was the winter events, obviously ice storms, things like that would take you out for extended periods of time. And then in Cali, the wildfire risks. So I can tell you after a wildfire, the process of rebuilding is slow because if it's just devastational, I mean, you're just down to concrete. Now you're looking at rebuilding homes. All the demand for supply goes up, demand for contractors goes up, demand for everything goes up. So you're just looking at really extending those times where you're trying to put life back on track. And we've lost like whole communities now, where the whole town, Paradise, the whole town was wiped out kind of thing. So really what I'm thinking, personally, I don't want to focus on the basics, but if you guys have a couple tips for like just kind of unique things that you found. We talked this morning about kind of the holes in your plan. Every time it's a disaster scenario, you kind of get to test out what's going on, So just some like tips that people can really take away as far as, things maybe they haven't thought about beyond what we normally talk about as far as like your 72-hour food supply, your water supply, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, usually when we're talking about like post-natural disaster preparedness specifically, and I don't draw distinctions between what kind of natural disaster we're talking about, like everybody has the same base needs. We all need food, we all need water, we all need shelter. If you don't have those three things, bad things start happening very quickly. What exactly we use to fulfill all those needs is going to be drastically altered by what type of scenario we're talking about. In the event of like a wildfire or a flood, staying in your home is no longer an option. Your home is no longer a safe, secure source of shelter. You have to be able to pick up and move. And as a result, if those are the emergencies you're thinking about, your preps all have to be mobile. On the flip side of things, if you're talking about hurricanes, like, a hurricane, by the grace of modern meteorology, we know those things are coming within a margin of error several days, maybe even a week out. So you have time, you have sufficient time to make a decision on whether or not you need to leave, you need to hold where you're at. But at the end of the day, like, we all have the same base needs. So that's always what I try to explain to people is if you live in an area where, let's say, a wildfire is your greatest worry, then you need to have your preps mobile so that they can move if the wildfire is going to threaten your home. If your biggest worry is, say, a big tornado, like what some of my in-laws up in North Louisiana have to deal with, you probably need to look at a tornado shelter. Or you need some kind of way to batten down the hatches and live through that storm. And in that tornado shelter, which will be your shelter, you also need to have your emergency food, emergency water, and so on and so forth. On the flip side of things, if you're talking about a hurricane, now I'm in kind of a unique situation where my preps, it helps if they're mobile, because if I have to evacuate my family, I need to be able to take some stuff with me to take care of everybody. But if I'm gonna choose to like stand my ground, I have to be prepared to be without. I tell everybody modern anything for like at least a week, bare minimum. Like the exercise I always give to people is, I'm like, okay, imagine if I walked up to your house and I shut off your main water valve and I flip your main breaker. Right. What do you have to do in that situation to survive? Because, that potentially is what you're going to have to suck up and deal with for the next 1 to 2 weeks after a major hurricane. There's no power, no running water, no gas, nothing. So if you don't have it bottled up, stored up on the shelf or ready to rock and roll, you're going to learn to do without very quickly.
Yeah, we're setting those lines at the store.
Yeah, 0% chance of that happening.
Yeah.
Even lines at the store might not be...
yeah, because they can't run, right, as far as it goes.
After the event, they won't be able to. Before the event, they run quick.
Yep.
Well, and I can't speak for everybody else who's dealt with hurricanes, but I know that, Hurricane Ida, which was only a couple of years ago down here, it was a very strong Cat 4 hurricane. Some people argue it was a Cat 5 when it made landfall. I don't care. All I know is the weather station a mile and a half away from where I live clocked 130 mile an hour winds when that thing went past us. So it was spicy. But in the time immediately before that storm, we had the typical lines at the grocery stores, lines at the gas pumps, all the people that waited the last second were freaking out over it. But in the immediate time following the hurricane, some fuel stations were able to bring in generators because they had fuel in the ground. They just had to get power to pump it out. But there was a severely constricted supply. A lot of these places were they were prioritizing first responders. So if you had a police cruiser or if you had an ambulance, they divert the rest of the line and let you come fuel up. Well, that happens often enough, then the guy who's trying to get 5 gallons to feed his generator to keep his food from spoiling doesn't get fuel. So that's why I keep going back to this idea that the idea that, well, the hurricane passed yesterday, I can go out, I can get stuff. You got to let go of that. Not only may you not be able to, but you don't want to be on the road when there's tree limbs and there's power lines down. You don't want to be in these lines full of angry, irritable people where things can pop off, and things have been known to pop off. You don't want to be in any of those situations. You want to be at your home, taking care of your property, securing your loved ones. That's where you need to focus your energy. If you have a good relationship with your neighbors, you need to be focusing on making sure that everybody's productive and everybody's taken care of and everybody's in a good place. And if you don't have a good relationship with your neighbors, you might want to work on that just a little bit, because I'll be the first one to say, that the next morning after Hurricane Ida, when we were all in the front yard, it was a real quick assessment of who's in bad shape, who's staying, who's leaving.
Right. Yeah. And Chin, you talk a lot about this too, helping your neighbors back in the townhome days.
Yeah, and that's when I met my neighbors the most was pre-storm, helping everybody get their shutters put up. People didn't, in a townhome situation, a lot of transient people coming in, people going out, rental units and stuff, and they didn't know. It was the old hat there, so I was always out there with the ladder, trying to help people get organized, get stuff put up. The one thing that I had happen, well, it didn't affect me because I was good to go, but we had a Walmart that was probably 3 miles from the house, so I drove by it all the time. It closed up about 4 days out from landfall, or predicted landfall. So if your game plan was to go to Walmart, the night before the storm or the 2 days before the storm, you were screwed. It was boarded up. Which I was surprised at how early they boarded that store up.
Interesting. But, yeah, and following the snowstorm here, when we actually had that crazy snowstorm, they couldn't get any trucks in to Walmart. That was done, So people that were like, oh, well, I need this, that, the other. Well, no, it wasn't happening.
And in Charleston, they would direct all traffic going out. So, the interstate, all 4 lanes were going outbound instead of coming in. So,
gotcha.
Well, and And that was also something I was going to mention since y'all brought up the trucks. Sarah, earlier when you were talking about wildfires and how they just march across a landscape and devastate everything. But the other thing I don't think a lot of people think about, and this is a little bit more of a macro perspective, but when you're talking about disaster recovery, you're talking about stretched supply lines at a certain point. Like after Hurricane Ida, I found out just from local word of mouth. Apparently, there was a man who he had a 2-axle trailer. He had several large commercial fuel tanks on it. He was filling up about an hour east of us out in like Gulfport, Biloxi, Mississippi. And he was taking fuel with a manual transfer pump down to a family he had in New Orleans. And he was running back and forth every day to keep them stocked with fuel for their generators and everything. But the reason he had to go that far was because where I was, there were only a couple of gas stations at this point that were really open, and you were not going to sit there and get 200 gallons when everybody else is trying to get 5 gallons to keep their generator running. Somebody would have started a fist fight over that.
Right.
So like people were having to go 100 miles in some cases, 50 miles in a lot of cases to go get fuel and go get food and go get water and then bring it back into the area. And that's something that I think people need to bear in mind, is that the supply lines get stretched very, very quickly. Building materials after a major hurricane become very difficult to get in the local area, because before trucks like your local Home Depot or your local Lowe's or whatever, wherever you normally get plywood, for example, before they can get a truck full of plywood into that store to refill it so you can get whatever you need to fix your house, they have to get the power stood back up. They have to get fuel trucks in. They have to get fuel, because if those truckers can't get fuel, they're not coming.
Yep.
So it turns into this situation where like you have all these tasks that have to be done, and they cascade on each other. You have to get A done before you can do B, and then you have to get C, and then you have to get D, and there is no putting them in a different order. It has to get done in the order it has to get done in. Like that was part of the situation we had post Hurricane Katrina down in New Orleans, and I only know this because my dad at the time worked for Energy. He worked for the major power company, which one day I will get him to come on my podcast and talk about Hurricane Katrina, because he can tell some stories.
Yeah.
But the part of the situation Energy had was they were trying to get power restored because you kind of needed to, but they had trouble doing that because so much of these areas were underwater. Well, they had to get the pumps back on to pump the water out of the streets. They had to get the levee breaches fixed before they could do that. And before you could turn the pumps on, you need the power. Yep. It was this weird situation where it's like, okay, we have 3 things. It's like watching 3 dogs chase each other around in a circle.
Yeah. And even after even during COVID and all that, back in California, in the area that I'm from, or that I lived in, when the supply chain started going down heavily, like you could already see the movement from people in the city driving an hour out to the country stores, to the country grocery stores, because those were the ones that still had food left, as opposed to like those inner city grocery stores and that. And they were just totally, I would almost argue that the urban areas need to think food more urgently than people in the country, because there's so many more people vying for those supplies that are in the store, that if you don't have that ready to go somewhere and you're thinking you're going to be able to keep shopping on a daily basis, well, that's just not going to happen. I think most of them are on a 1-day supply now. Like you say, it's this very delicate dance of supply chain that we do, and it can easily be shaken.
Extremely easily. Yeah. I mean, but this is also the reason why, like, since you brought up COVID, like when COVID first came to this country, and I'm talking about the days immediately preceding 2 weeks to slow the spread, when no one legitimately knew what the hell was going on, because we weren't getting any reliable information from anybody who could have possibly known anything. Mm-hmm. Like I sat down with my wife, and we had a very, very serious discussion about how bad do we think this is? What do we think is going on? Because again, there's no reliable information source. So I told my wife, I'm like, bearing in mind that at this point, the decision had been made, send everybody home. Everybody's going to remote work. That's how this is going to be. And I told Gillian, I'm like, we have enough food and water and everything in this house to nail that front door shut and wait this out.
Right.
I don't care if it takes 3 months or 6 months. Like, we can figure this out. We don't have to go to the grocery store. We don't have to have contact with the outside world. But I can tell you what's about to happen in the next 2 weeks.
And that's the feeling, like, that's security. That's like going, okay, I can weather this storm. I'm going to be all right, you know?
Yeah. But what I told Gillian was, I'm like, in the next 2 weeks, one of two things is going to happen. Either the entire New York City metro area and at least 2 major metro areas in California where you have that high population density are going to literally implode, because this will prove to be so devastating and so communicable. It'll wipe out whole metro areas in a matter of 2 weeks. Or that's not going to happen. And then now we know something we don't know today. We'll know something in 2 weeks. So for the next 2 weeks, we didn't go to the grocery store. We didn't do without. We had everything we needed. Hell, we were eating tacos and, baking and stuff. It literally, our preps are built around the idea that if I want it, I better find a way to have it and put some back on the shelf. So like, we didn't feel the pinch. But once that 2 week period passed and we realized, okay, we now have some data coming in. We have a pretty good idea of who this is impacting worse than others. And 2 people in their late 30s in pretty good health, I feel like we'll be okay. So from that moment forward, my wife and I adopted a plan of, we're going to go to the grocery store regularly, just like we do now. And we're going to continue to buy food whether we need it or not. You know what I'm saying? Like, the store shelves, the stores operate on this just in time system where when in optimal usage, the truck will show up and bring you the widget right after you sell the last one. Like, that's how just in time supply chains work. So what I told Gillian was, I'm like, to stay ahead of a potential supply chain deficit, we're going to continue to buy stuff whether we need it or not. We're not going to eat into 6 months worth of preps. We're going to continue to buy stuff so that the period in time where we would run out of food every week gets backed up another week. And we've continued to do that for the last several years. I mean, we put a lot of effort into our food stock and into long-term, into midterm, into a chest freezer full of meat. And now we're at a point where we're trying to kind of like pull back on the reins just a little bit, be a little more strategic with what we buy. Because like, I didn't realize until I went into that chest freezer a week or 2 ago, I have probably 40 pounds of ground beef in the chest freezer.
Right.
Had no earthly idea how much I had. Didn't care. Every time I went on sale, every time it went on sale, go buy a bunch, vacuum bag it, shove it in the freezer. We'll eat it eventually.
One of the interesting things that Chin brought up to me last week that I didn't think about because I've been living country so long was the road infrastructure. So that you want to share that story there, Chin?
What was that?
About having, when the rain's coming in and all that, like your roads just slipping, and you're the one who's responsible for caring for that.
On private road,
right. Most people are like urban setting. You don't think about like, that's not your job, but in a disaster, right?
Yeah, I'm like totally rural, so I'm like, there's a country road, and then there's a small paved road which you basically have to pull over to let another car go by, and then there's a dirt road that goes up to my driveway road. So, I mean, I'm like, and from the end of the pavement all the way up to my house, it's just me and a few neighbors that have to get out there with shovels, rakes, and I mean, I bought a tractor, so we are the road crew, you know?
Yeah, and I've started this thinking about it because we did the same thing when we lived off Penobscot Road. It was the same way. Like, you're literally out there filling potholes, taking care of that road. But urban setting, like in my current house, it would be like, that's not even something you'd think about as an individual. Like, what if your roadway is damaged? Who's going to take care of that? Like, are you going to be sitting there waiting for help to come in? Or do you have any kind of skills to be able to tackle that? You know? I
mean, I know Phil's got some mad chainsaw skills now, I'm sure, after going through some hurricanes. But that's something that a suburbanite might not think about. But to have a chainsaw, know how to use it, have the oils, the bar oil and everything, so you can actually run it, might be your way out.
right? Some essentials that we don't necessarily focus on when you're in an urban setting as compared to a country setting. So,
just driving into town a year ago, and we had a thunderstorm, and like the next day we were driving into town, and a tree had come down across the road, and there wasn't a road crew. There was just two guys with pickup trucks with chainsaws cutting the tree in two spots and then pushing it out of the way with their truck. I mean, it was just, they had to get by, so they had what they needed in the back of the truck, and they moved it.
Right.
The road crew wasn't there yet, so.
It's definitely a different personality.
Yeah.
But since you brought up chainsaw skills, I'll be the first to admit that Hurricane Ida, when that hit my house, I didn't even own a chainsaw.
Yeah.
I had never needed one. I live in the suburbs. You know, like, I wasn't a complete moron, thankfully. So, like, I had an axe and I had a bow saw and a pole saw and, you know, typical homeowner stuff. Like, if I had one time we had a tree, like a little bitty spindly thing, maybe about 4 inches around the trunk, but it was leaning over my yard from the wood line next to my house. So I went out there with the axe and took a notch out of it and cut the backside. I mean, I felled a tree with an axe because I had an axe. I needed the tree down. I dealt with the problem. But when two oak trees land on your house and one squashes your front yard, there is no amount of axe and bow saw that's going to fix that problem.
No.
I needed it. Yeah. So fortunately, we had some family come in from out of town, and my brother-in-law called me up. Like the morning they showed up at our house, they got there that afternoon. They called me up. He said, "Hey, how much do you want me to spend on your first chainsaw that I'd like you to reimburse me for?"
Yep. And
like, that's when I learned how to use a chainsaw at age, I don't know, what was I, 38, 39?
Right.
We were cutting up all the junk in the front yard and figured it out. I mean, that's when I learned that skill.
Those types of things are coming to my mind because, like, in my books, it's not just a local disaster, right? It's a national disaster. So when you start having disaster on that level where you have multiple impact areas and you can't just shift forces, and shift resources around as fast to be able to help people in those zones, that's when it could get really problematic. And so you, as an individual, you have to be ready to go out and be your state, whatever, road crew. There's nobody to call, right? If the tree's down, you're going to have to take care of it. How are you going to do that? Like you say, with your axe or with a tool that fits the job. And so sometimes I think we need to even, that's what I say, like, expand beyond the basics. So we're thinking about, okay, there is road infrastructure here. There is serious infrastructure. And if people can't, I mean, everybody's like, oh, the government's going to come help me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, they're not, especially if it's not, if it's a nationwide something. Right now, they're talking about a coordinated attack that might happen to our country. Everybody should be prepared for this type of thing, So if it is something that's affecting multiple areas, now we are the response team, and people really need to step up to that plate, be ready to step up to that plate, to go out with your neighbors and take care of it.
But even on that level, I mean, a disaster on the scale of what you're talking about, no one is coming to save you. You are going to figure your own life out, and that's just the way it is. But I tend to take a little bit different point of view, even when we're talking about a localized disaster, like, for example, Cat 4, Cat 5 hurricane, because those things don't hit a neighborhood. They wipe out like 7 zip codes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But I take the point of view of, even if I know our neighbors to the east, our neighbors to the west, God bless Texas and Mississippi, can send aid to us. I got into preparedness because I feel like I have a duty as a husband and father to provide for my family. And I'm sorry, honey, the power is out is not an acceptable answer when your kid is hungry or your wife is hungry. You're going to have to, at a certain point, I take the point of view of, even if I know help is coming, I want to be able to self-aid because I want help on my terms.
Right.
I want to be able, the day after the hurricane, because like this is exactly what we did after Ida, but the day after the hurricane, my daughter flew a kite in the front yard. She needed a little decompression time after, the hell on earth we dealt with that night. And I stood up a 10 by 10 pop-up tent in the front yard to give me and my wife some cover from the sun and get us out get us out of the hot house and did some ventilation. It was August. Pulled out a couple of lawn chairs, grab some bottled water off the shelf, started a pot. I think I started a pot of something outside on the camp stove to get us fed. But I did not want to have to wait for the parish or for the state or for God Almighty FEMA to show up to feed us and take care of us. That's a level of helplessness I'm just not willing to tolerate. So my point of view is, whether we're talking about help is not coming or help is simply not going to be here in the next 5 minutes, I think everybody has a real obligation to assume that help is not coming. Because if it does show up and you're taken care of, you alleviated a burden that could go to someone less fortunate. But if help's not coming, you have alleviated your own burden.
I love that point of view as well. That's a great point of view for it. Yeah, that's one thing I was going to talk about, like personal versus state versus federal response time. I mean, if you can help yourself, by all means, help yourself, right? I mean, come on now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, after Ida, my wife walked around and checked in on a bunch of the neighbors, found an older couple about a half a block away from us. They had no emergency water.
Yeah.
Now, we're on city water, but like I was telling you earlier, the holding tank that services our subdivision got hit with a pine tree. So water pressure was 0 the next morning after Ida. But this couple, they couldn't cook rice. They didn't have anything to drink. They were dead in the water. And my wife was like, can we help them out? And I was like, yes. I know I have 28 days supply of water bottled up on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, go take some, bring it to them, call it an act of mercy. I don't want them to die in their house when we have the ability to take care of them.
Right.
Now, the problem would have been if that had been my last gallon of water that she was giving away, what then?
Right. And that's when you get into length of disaster, length of supply chain being turned back on, because you want to help. But at the same time, you don't know how long that's going to continue on for. So, yeah, that would be like the next big ethical question to explore. There is the time period. But no, we had one big power outage. I had just had foot surgery. It was around Christmas time, and Brock made me eggs Benedict on the wood stove.
That's a good man.
Right? I know. He had the stools all lined up like a counter, and he pulled it off, man, with hollandaise sauce and everything. I was just like, I am so spoiled right now. So it was pretty epic. So I also give you props to that point of view of we got to be there for our families, and we have to support them, and we have to be there to take care of it, not rely upon somebody else to pick up those shreds. We've kind of been beating that horse a lot on the show lately. I hope everybody's getting the hint, because it's important right now more than ever, I have a feeling. So whether that's, the earth is racing men versus race, or versus humans versus disaster. So it's just kind of, seems like the race is on. It's just snowballing. So just be ready. Yeah.
But I guess my point of view is whether we are heading towards a serious systems collapse or we're heading towards another major weather pattern shift. I'm always very pragmatic when it comes to preparedness, in the guise of, we're all talking about being able to take care of your base needs. I don't get to pick the emergency.
Right.
All I get to pick is how I respond to it. So I tell people when they look at a specific threat and think, oh, I better get ready for this threat, it's like, okay, that's like saying, I'm going to prep for Hurricane Katrina, but the next one in line I'm not going to worry about. It's like, no, there's a line of thought here where you are preparing to deal with the systems that you depend on collapsing. You should be prepared for that collapse no matter when it comes. The only good thing is that if you start preparing today and it's a while before anything pops off, you're better prepared than if you wait to the last second.
And that's probably the biggest key to rebuilding after, is because you were prepared for it. It's just like going into surgery or something. You want to make sure your body's as strong as it can possibly be before you go in and have that surgery, so that you're not too weakened by it. You can bounce back quickly. And isn't that the same thing with preparing for any kind of disaster, and that if you're prepared ahead of time, you can bounce back quicker on the reverse?
I mean, definitely but let's throw mental and physical resilience into that discussion. Like you and I and Chen and plenty of the listeners, I'm sure, know that like in a disaster situation, everything is harder.
Right.
Everything takes more effort when the light switch doesn't cause power to come on, and when the water stops flowing out of the tap. Everything gets harder. Everything takes more effort, more time. So if your body is in better physical condition, you are better able to weather an emergency situation. And in the case of like post hurricane, that was a lot of butt kicking work over 3 days to cut 3 oak trees, and unwind all that mess. But it was the physical resilience and the mental resilience to not look at that mess we had in the front yard and just give up, just quit, just say, oh, we're never going to fix this problem. I mean, the day after Ida, before I even knew I had help coming, I was out there with an axe and a pole saw. Right. Because it's what I had.
Because that's what you do the best you can with what you got.
Yeah, well, that and the fact that I had, one pretty good sized limb that was sitting on top of the garage. Everything else had glanced off the house, but I really wanted to get everything off the beams of the house so I could assess the house, make sure it was safe to stay in. I wanted to clear enough of the brush away from my wife's Jeep so I can make sure that we had 2 working vehicles if we had to evacuate. Like, I had tasks to take care of, and I had to, man up a little bit, ruck up and deal with the problem that I had in front of me and not let it just defeat me and beat me down. I mean, anybody that's ever read about a survival situation, like a person that's stranded in the wilderness or they're stuck, they're floating out at sea or whatever for days on end, the difference between a person that makes it and doesn't make it is very often whether or not that person decides to give up. Because if you quit, your body quits.
Yep.
And if you fight, your body is going to fight like the third ape on the ramp of Noah's Ark. Like your body will fight as long as your brain does within reason. So I always tell everybody, I'm like, if your mental and your physical resilience is up to par, if your preparedness and your preps and the materials you put back are up to par, you should get through that emergency at a minimum a lot better than you would otherwise. Mm-hmm. But if you don't take the time ahead of an emergency to put all those things in line, you're going to be fighting uphill.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I got to get into some Changing Earth news. You going to stick around for it, or you want to peace out? It's totally up to you.
No, I'll hang out for a bit.
All right. So everybody, if you don't know, Phil is host of Matter of Facts podcast. Refresh me one more time on the one we just did this morning. All I can think of is it begins with R, and I'm just spacing right now.
Yep. So the other podcast is Raising Values. That's the one my wife and I started together, and I am the co-host / producer on that one.
Yeah, all I could think of was like resilience, and I was like, no, that's so wrong. It's so wrong.
No. Whereas Matter of Facts is really focused around like preparedness and physical threats to our well-being, and Raising Values really grew more out of my wife seeing like trends that were affecting families and attempts to subvert our children and tear apart the family bonds. And we wanted to address a lot of that. So we do talk about a lot of like relationship stuff. We jokingly call it our weekly marriage counseling.
It's cool. It's a cool podcast. Yeah. And we have different styles. See, me and Brock, we do sparring, and then you guys do. Not kidding. Alrighty, let's go ahead and jump into the weather music. I'm going to have to be like the Micro Machine Man, so let's get into it. All right, so Changing Earth news, week of the 5th to the 11th. We had a big solar week over the last week. A couple days ago, we had an X-class flare. It came off the leading edge of the sun, so it was just a glancing blow as far as the CME goes. But when they go off in front of us, they love to feed. We have this little like proton connection line to the sun, and the particles just love to flow down that line and smack us right at the poles. That happened. I'll talk more about that, but that was a big one. We actually had a full halo event last week, which would have been like, if that was aimed at the Earth, it would have been big trouble. But luckily, it went off the other side. Lots of C-class flares. There was actually an M-class flare today. So we have that coming in at us. Nothing's going to be scary, but you know how I love to keep my eyes on it. So all of that we have coming in. Big news of last week is probably the atmospheric river just crushing Southern California. They're dealing with a lot of water, 471 mudslides, millions without power, and at least 7 dead because of the flooding that's going on down there. Sacramento area was also hit pretty hard. They are in catastrophic loss. It was deemed from like the 3rd to the 7th. It's all cat losses. So prayers to everybody dealing with that. That has been just one after another this year for them. So, all right, last week on the 5th, there was 378 earthquakes that were 2.0 or bigger, biggest of which was a 5.4 in the Raisins Ridge. So these are all places out on the ocean, big earthquakes that are like on the Mariana Trench and stuff like that. Interesting places this week, so we'll keep our eyes on that. I've got more to come. Indonesia, Java just got hit again. Tons of rain, hundreds of homes, 3-foot deep floodwaters submerging those homes. So they've had some major infrastructure damage to schools, to hotels. Ecuador, in Inabora, there was heavy rains. Those streets have turned to rivers. Japan, Tokyo got hit with a mega snowstorm, just brought all public transportation to a halt, put power out. Hundreds of people injured there due to that snowfall. The Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico was hit really hard with the very big low pressure system, severe flooding and heavy winds there. And then on the next day, on the 6th, that storm moved into Cuba and just smacked them really good. 100-mile-an-hour winds hit Havana. The ocean swells were so high, they were bringing like jellyfish up into town and stuff like that. And then the temps fell to 50 degrees in Cuba, which is also very, very unusual. So on February 6th, there was 368 earthquakes that were 2.0 or bigger, biggest of which was a 5.5 in El Salvador. Indonesia saw more rain, torrential flooding. I mean, it wasn't just a flood. The rivers were literally then going through Java. That water was ripping. 56 hectares of rice fields were lost. 2,822 homes were affected, and transportation was literally cut off. The roadways were cut off, and trains couldn't move, anything like that. In central Brazil, more so on the west side of central Brazil, they had a very strong storm come through Campo Mar. Power outages, trees down, lots of homes damaged over there. And then an absolutely horrific event in the Philippines. A big old landslide came down, hit this gold mining village. 15 people were killed, confirmed dead. There's 110 missing as of the 6th. 31 people confirmed injured, 3 people seriously out of that. And there was an 8-year-old rescued 2 days after the event happened. So they were, holding out hope for the, other 100 people that are buried because this landslide hit their village. And, but they've seen a lot of rain. There's been a lot of earth movement. So, as the days tick by, that survival rate's going to go down. There was also an M-class flare that released on the 6th. That one was just a glancing blow. It was coming in off of the incoming area of the sun. On the 7th of February, there was 467 earthquakes that were 2.0 or bigger, biggest of which was a 5.4 in the South China Sea. There was another 5.1 that hit Oklahoma. There's some home damage, property damage. So that's 2 pretty significant earthquakes. They were actually calling it a swarm, which is really concerning along that New Madrid fault line. So we're going to keep our eyes on that. There was also a 3.0 near Mount Rainier volcano. We have lots of volcanoes heating up on the Ring of Fire. So we'll also keep our eye on that mountain. That's the day that the full halo ejection happened that was pointed away from Earth. China is getting ready for the Chinese New Year. They had all travel halted because of severe blizzard conditions in China. Jamaica was hit with that low pressure system. They saw a lot of flooding in their coastal areas from it. And then the Chilean wildfires continue raging. We have about 120 people deceased from that wildfire, about 1,600 homes lost, and just hundreds of people missing. So really, they're not going to know the extent of that damage till they start getting some of those fires out. On the 8th of February, there was 440 earthquakes or 2.0 or bigger. That's the day that the 5.1 hit the central mid-Atlantic ridge. So in the last 2 years that we've been, hitting the Changed Earth news really hardcore, I don't think I've ever seen the mid-Atlantic ridge as our top earthquake of the day in that 5-point slot. So that's really interesting. A magnitude 4 also hit off the Florida coast. Very, very unusual place to have an earthquake. And then Nova Scotia got hit with a major blizzard, 5 foot of snow piling up, completely burying their vehicles there. On February 9th, there was 525 earthquakes that were 2.0 or bigger. That's a big number due to the sun activity, the solar activity that was happening. Biggest of which was a 6.2 in the South Pacific Ocean near New Zealand. That was felt from Melbourne, Australia, all the way to New Zealand. There was also another 4.4 in there that day. So that was rocking and rolling. And that is the day that the X-class flare went off just ahead of the Earth. It did cause a radio blackout in South America and Africa. They really took the brunt of it. The Iceland volcanic eruption activity is continuing. This is the third eruption. More activity near Grindavik, and also the road to Blue Lagoon was completely engulfed with lava flows. So I always laugh about the Blue Lagoon because like the movie, but I guess it's like these hot springs that everybody loves to go to, major tourist attractions. So they were bummed out about that. Another round of rain comes in, hits California on the 9th. And then on the 10th, there was 501 earthquakes that were 2.0 or bigger, biggest of which was a 5.8 in the Philippines. There was a 4.6 that hit Southern California. That's one of the things with all the rain. I'm really worried about their fault lines down there. They're getting very moist, which is not normal for that area of the country. There was also a big 5.7 that hit in Hawaii. It was felt from Hilo to Kauai. So eyes on that one because they keep that's by the big island, not Kilauea. They keep their eyes on Kilauea, but the other big shield volcano that's down there. Anyway, I'm drawing a blank. Central Texas, we saw flash flooding due to heavy rains. Luckily, up here in the north, it wasn't as bad. We're kind of in the sweet spot. But they did have ping pong size hail in Tyler this morning. So that's knocking on the door pretty close. In British Columbia, Canada, the wildfires have been put out because it's been wintertime. Well, they are starting to rekindle themselves back to life. So they get to deal with the wildfires in the wintertime as well. That's going to be just so much fun. And then in Wisconsin, they recorded the first ever February tornado in the state of Wisconsin in Evansville. So very unusual weather systems happening, guys. It's because they had just crazy warm weather, and then you got the cold just smacks into it, and it turns it into tornadoes and things like that. They also had a tornado touchdown in Indiana. So today, ironically enough, there wasn't a whole lot going on today. And also the earthquake resource that I used for my earthquake data didn't have any data running for today, which I've never seen before. So that was really interesting as well. I don't know why it's not there. I'll just have to pick it up next week. So I can't give you the daily number for today. There was that M-class flare this morning. It was completely earth-facing. It's going to be headed right at us. As far as volcanoes, there's currently 28 volcanoes erupting on planet Earth. That's up one from last week. Most of those are erupting in Indonesia. They have 8 volcanoes erupting in Indonesia right now. And, Indonesia is not that big. So that is a lot of activity taking place down there. We have 17 volcanoes showing minor activity, and we have 31 showing unrest. Those numbers are exactly the same from last week, so we just added one to the list. We do have some wildfires to report in the United States right now. We're still at preparedness level of 1. We have 2 new fires that popped up. Number 2 on the list was North Carolina. They had a 210-acre fire. It was one fire, and it is not contained at this time. And number 1 on the list was Oklahoma, 429-acre fire. And it is contained at this time. So we had all that earthquake activity there. And then we have some fire activity. That's just kind of strange. So I don't know how that fire started up, but that'd be interesting to look into. All right, guys. So that's our Changing Earth news for this week. Sun cycle. That's the name of the week, is sun cycle. It'll be interesting to see what happens next week as far as our earthquake activity and volcanic activity uptick on planet Earth. Ta-da! I told you I was going micro machines, man, and I made it.
We have faith in you.
Yeah, right? I can talk quick. So, yeah, hopefully we don't have any more... we could have a little pause for a little bit, little break, little room for everybody to breathe from. It's been really socking the UK and all of that. Europe's been getting slammed with storms, and you know what's happening here with the crazy weather. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on these days. Alrighty, well, Phil. Thank you so much for coming on the show and discussing that with everybody. Like, I knew you were the guy for the job. We're going to have to do it again shortly because I've got more good ones coming up.
And anytime you feel like me talking your ear off, just give me a ping and I'm sure I can make myself available.
Right? It's always such an easy night. I'm like, yeah, I can just sit back, get my Barca lounger out.
Yeah, I mean, hand a cage and a big, tall cup of coffee, and he'll pretty much talk until you get tired of listening.
Right? Yeah, I love it. That's why you guys got to come to Prepper Camp. You get to sit around the fire with us, just hang out.
I've already got tickets in hand, arrangements made, reservations done.
Yep. I come for the Phil show.
Yeah, and I'm imagining we'll probably have... down there in the vendors area, we'll probably have PBN Row again.
Yeah.
But this time, I am going to have Gillian on hand, because I was telling her last year with me and Andrew trying to record 4 shows a day and friggin' talk to people that were walking by. I told her, I'm like, I could have used a third person, really and truly. So we're still waiting. We're still kind of trying to figure out if she wants to try to horn in some Raising Values content while she's there, or let Matter of Facts kind of, do the recording and everything, and she be there to support us. I don't know. Decisions will need to be made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's one of the nice things about having the fam with me. You can walk away from the booth and not be like, oh, we need somebody else to be watching what's going on, when I go to teach my classes and stuff like that. Especially my self-defense class, I need to beat up on Brock. I mean, it has to be done. So, it's nice to have the family, the backup support to be able to help out with that. So. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and split. I apparently missed a call while we were talking, so I'm going to go play catch up now.
All right. We'll see you later. Everybody can check Phil out. Well, you're in the PBN community. You know where to find Phil on PBN, but you can definitely find Phil at Matter of Facts. You want to drop your website?
Yep, www.mofpodcast.com, or you can search Matter of Facts Podcast pretty much anywhere social media takes you.
Perfect. All right. Thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, Chin, you ready to wrap up?
I am. It's been a show.
Yeah. Great time. Anybody has any questions, of course, just fire away. I always love picking your brain about the urban experience to the country experience, because I've been out in the country so long. I'm like, oh, yeah, I never really thought about that. So it's always a good time. And we got Dave coming on the show. He doesn't know it, but he's going to be on the show pretty soon.
I go hog tie him and drag him into the studio.
Yep. You know me. I'll be out there with my cuffs. If he doesn't know how to get out of them, it's not my problem. He didn't watch my classes. And I'm going to hit Dane up too, get him on. And some more great folks from the Changing Earth audio drama. And it's going to be a fun show next week. So, I'm not even releasing topic. I'm just going to hold everybody in suspense on what it's going to be. Alrighty, guys, thanks so much for listening to the Changing Earth podcast. If you want to subscribe and help the show out, I would really appreciate it. You can do so at www.changingearthseries.com. Lots of great content for you over there. And that is just the hub of everything Changing Earth. So that, once again, it's www.changingearthseries.com. All right, Chin, let's get out of here. Until next time, remember, dream,
survive,
thrive.
Thank you for joining Sarah and Chen for this episode of the Changing Earth podcast. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Day After Disaster, Without Land, The Walls of Freedom, Battle for the South, Dark Days in Denver, and The Endless Night at www.authorSarahFHathaway.com. If you love the Changing Earth series and podcast, become a supporter while you're there.